Hey, what's up everybody? How's it going? How's everybody doing today? Welcome back to the channel. Sorry it's been such a long time. Hopefully all of you are at least attempting to stay clean and stay safe out there. Because as it turns out, the movie that we're talking about today, it's a, well, let's just say it's a potential future outcome if all the morons out there in the world just continue to act like morons. And that movie, of course, is 28 Days Later. And for the sake of consistency, at the end of the video, I'm gonna at least attempt to give this movie a score, at least as best as I can. But incidentally, I did actually see this movie when I was very, very young. And for those of you that have been following me for any period of time, you guys know that if I have a lot of childhood nostalgia towards a movie, I generally don't give it a score. Because I personally try to go into movies with as little expectations and as clear of a head as I could possibly have. And if I'm going in with a lot of bias, it kind of skews a little bit in favor of the film. And then there's also the philosophical side of that, which, you know, the things that we do and experience when we're children, it's who you are as a child is not the sum total of the individual human being that you will ultimately become. So I try not to put too many childhood opinions up on a pedestal, but it's like when you grow up with something, it becomes a part of your psyche and you just kind of can't help it. So it's fair enough that I bring it up. But enough about my childhood. Let's talk about this movie, shall we? As for this movie, I would say the most central plot to the entire thing revolves around a character named Jim who wakes up in a deserted hospital. So naturally, he gets up to take a look around, and he goes around the hospital, he goes outside of the hospital, and then he stumbles across a couple people, and then eventually he becomes like very, very aware of the fact that a serious virus just basically wiped out humanity. And eventually he links up with some other survivors, and then they basically explain to him what happened because he's been in a coma for the past few weeks. So it's basically a survival horror movie, and along the way there's a bunch of other characters and a bunch of stuff happens, and then you basically get the idea. Now, originally, back in the day, the major selling point of this movie when it first came out was essentially that this is a zombie movie, but the zombies are really aggressive and they can run at you. Now, if you're one of those elitist people who wants to make the argument that this isn't technically a zombie movie because of X, Y, and Z, like, you're welcome to make that argument, and like, that's fine. But let's be honest, to your average, normal, everyday person, it's basically a fucking zombie movie. First of all, the overall plot revolves around a virus that if you get bit by somebody that has it, or if like the blood gets inside of you somehow, then you become infected. And then second of all, once that virus gets inside of you, you essentially turn into a brainless killing machine. Thirdly, the movie takes place in a dystopian future where everybody's basically a scavenger. And last of all, it's a survival horror movie where everybody's trying to run away from the infected. In other words, it's basically the easiest way for you to describe this movie to any random person. And as an adult watching this movie with, you know, with a much more rational eye and also an ear for certain things about film, I have to say that this movie still to this day remains beyond solid. I do have a few qualms with the movie, but they're mostly just like minor, very minor things. For example, one small thing is that there's a female character whose the dub over her voice doesn't really match up her face as well as it could have. And also that character wasn't particularly well acted either. Not that it was a bad performance, but it just wasn't anything special. So it was just kind of like very nonplussed by it. And another thing that I also thought was weird was that there's one character in particular, I don't remember if it was perfect throughout the entire movie, but I just remember that character's hair looked absolutely flawless for no reason. Which again, not the biggest deal in the world, but it is a little odd when almost all the characters in the movie just clearly just give no shits whatsoever about what's going on here, and it's just ratty and just greasy and who knows what. Meanwhile, there's this other person who looks like they just left the hair and makeup department. The biggest negatives I have with the movie are probably a few things that happen in the third act. Not necessarily as far as the story is concerned, but just more so in the way that it was executed. It felt like there were some serious, what I like to call movie conveniences that happened towards the end of the movie-ish. And if those scenes had maybe had just a little bit extra polishing up as far as the writing goes and maybe been directed a little bit more diligently, maybe it would have played a little bit better, but ultimately it didn't ruin the movie for me necessarily. And there's a couple acting performances, particularly in like, let's say the later half of the movie, that are kind of hit and miss. But that also leads me to a very strong positive about the movie, and that is the performances given by two of the main actors. There's several other good performances, but I don't want to tell you who's in the movie because it's better if you go into this movie knowing as little as possible. The character Jim is played by a fairly young and up-and-coming Cillian Murphy before he got big, and also another very young performance from the immaculate Naomi Harris. Because let's be honest, if any of you out there have an attraction to females in any way, shape, or form, and you don't think Naomi Harris is just belligerently good-looking, I don't know what to tell you, because quite frankly, you and I, not the same. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is, I brought her up because her performance in the movie was probably the best acting performance in the entire thing. Even aside from the fact that she just had a character that was extremely well written, but I'll talk about that in a second. Cillian Murphy's performance was pretty up there. I thought he had a couple like dialogue deliveries that were a little wonky, but that's more so the director's fault, I would say. But again, not bad acting by any stretch of the imagination, just could have, you know, tiny bit of room for improvement. And another big positive about the movie, which I would also put in the weird category because it didn't 100% work all the time, was the music. More so than a lot of movies, there were some kind of weird music choices in the movie, but every once in a while, it hit the tone just ever so perfectly. So every once in a while, like, I really appreciated what the music had to offer. But then there was other times where the music tried to be its own atmosphere every once in a while. That's the only way I can really think of to describe it. But at the end of the day, just in general, as a solid piece of art, this movie, I adore this movie, like, to no end. And I would hazard to say that, like, in hindsight, I would say the movie was actually pretty innovative when it came out. Obviously, the running zombies thing was the big selling point, but also I think, I don't quote me on this, but I think this was one of the very first movies to have a wide theatrical release that was all shot on, like, smaller digital cameras. Again, I don't know that for sure, but it's very, very obvious when you watch the movie. It does have this kind of grainy texture that you don't see in films anymore, but you can kind of tell that it was like the early stages of the technology and they hadn't quite perfected it yet. But I mean, it is what it is. Like, they worked with what they could at that time as far as technology would allow them. But that brings me to another point, is the fact that there are some really dope moments of cinematography. And also, coupled with that, the movie had some really, really interesting editing choices. And when you put those two things together, they made for some really, really awesome action scenes and a lot of cool scares in the movie. Because this movie did a really good job of giving you maybe 0.5 seconds to be like, oh my God, what's about to happen? And then something crazy happens. But the movie also took a very, very good amount of time to develop pretty much almost every character that you see on screen to some extent or another. And even if certain characters don't have a lot of screen time, there are certain character traits that come out very, very quickly that manifest later on. And another element of this movie that I absolutely loved, as per usual, was the fact that no character was safe. And the way this movie dealt with horror tropes was actually really, really creative, because there's a few very key ones that it just completely flips on its head or just completely ignores. Meanwhile, it solidifies its, you know, place in the horror genre by keeping just a couple little tropes that you don't really notice until way later in the movie. And realistically, what I'm really trying to say with that is that this movie was shockingly well written. Although, knowing what I know today, looking back, it's really not that shocking, considering the movie was written by Alex Garland. And if you don't know who Alex Garland is, get off your candy ass and go watch the movie Ex Machina, and then watch Annihilation, and then you'll get an idea of who I'm talking about. That man is a fucking genius when it comes to sci-fi movies. It's just no other way to put it. But anyway, guys, overall, I have to say, revisiting this movie as an adult, it's not quite as awesome as I might have remembered, but there's still a lot of really, really good qualities about it, and there's way more layers to this movie than it might seem on the surface. And I would actually go out on a limb to say that this movie, and this might sound weird, but this movie and also Shaun of the Dead really revolutionized the zombie genre in that time period. Because these two movies really pushed the boundaries as to what most people thought could potentially come out of a zombie movie and made it something completely different and something wildly creative. And as far as a score, again, I don't even think it's fair that I really give this movie a score because it's so, like, steeped in my childhood, but if I were to guess and if I were to try to be objective, I would say it's somewhere between like 8.5 to 9.3 range or something like that. It's a solid horror movie. It holds up. It's exciting. It's got really good performances and really good character work. Like, there's a lot of good stuff about this movie, and it's well worth it, especially if you're a horror fan. But as per usual, guys, those are my thoughts. What are your guys' thoughts? Have you seen this movie? Have you even heard of it? Would you guys be interested in watching me do a spoiler review for it? Hop in the comments, let me know what's up. Other than that, if you like this video, give me a like, subscribe, share, hit the bell, do all that other YouTubey type of shit, and I will catch you guys next time.